What's going on, guys? Welcome into the Fantasy Slant. It is powered by Pro Football Focus and brought to you by DraftKings.com. I'm your host, Mike Tagliere. Alongside of me, I have my co-host for right now, Kevin Cole. He's kind of going through, we both have kids. His is sick right now, and he's a little one, so Kevin might have to take off on us for a little while, but no fears. We're going to keep going with the show. We're going to try and make it as simple as possible for him today and get through this pretty quick. So I don't want to waste too much time, but just know that you guys, if we don't cover anything in the show today, you can ask us on Twitter. He is at Cole_Kev. I am at Mike Tagliere NFL. But we're going to start going through the slate of games right now. Let's get into the first one, Kevin. It's the Thursday night game. We have Johnny Manziel starting on Thursday Night Football. Thursday Night Football has been kind of a mess this year, and it just continues this week with Manziel at the Bengals. I see this as being a pretty dominant run game performance by the Bengals, with Johnny Manziel having to throw more than they would necessarily like. What do you think about Travis Benjamin in this matchup?
Yeah, I think it's really a dart throw. It's probably a low probability that it'll be great, but there's some chance. I mean, Manziel had a couple of long connections with him, but those on very low volume, so we'll have to end up seeing what's happening. Now, in those games, they were decently close in the score, so they didn't have to pass a lot. So who knows? They may have to pass a lot more in this type of matchup. I'm really interested to see what's going to happen with Duke Johnson, because he's someone who's come on, has been a big part of the passing game. I think they acknowledge that maybe they need to use him a little bit more now that they've been mixing Turbin into the mix. But Manziel didn't really throw to him at all. So it'll be interesting to see if he's someone you can roll out there in PPR leagues and hope for a decent performance. I'm not sure, even though it's a game where they should be down a lot.
Yeah, no, it's something that's definitely concerning to me if you own Travis Benjamin. I know he had and people are talking about the fact that he has his biggest performance with Manziel back in, I think it was week 2 or week 3, where he had those 2 touchdowns. But remember, he had over 100 yards and those 2 touchdowns on just 3 catches. He had just 4 targets in that game. But I don't see him getting the double-digit targets like he's been getting with McCown. Although, like I said, the Browns are going to have to pass more than they'd like. Duke Johnson is a concern. For me, he's just a very, very low-end flex. On the Bengals side of the ball, I think that we're starting Jeremy Hill. I think he's a borderline RB1 this week. I think this is the one where he breaks out. Now, do you think that Gio Bernard is even an RB2 anymore, or do you consider him more of a flex option?
It's interesting. It's really this last game where you saw Hill just dominate things. So, I mean, I wouldn't be so quick to toss him aside. I think he's probably a PPR still, an RB2, but a little bit more questionable in a standard league.
Yeah, Marvin Jones came out actually just, I think it was yesterday, and said that he was really impressed with Hill last week, and then he had his 2 longest runs of the year, that they're really trying to get him going out of the bye. I believe him. I think that Gio Bernard was due for some regression. And Jeremy Hill, I mean, I see him a lock for 16 carries in this game against a Browns defense that we at PFF have them ranked as the 2nd worst run defense in the league. So start Jeremy Hill where you got him. Moving on to the next game, we don't need to spend too much time there. The Dolphins at the Bills. This is a rematch of a game that these two played way back in week 2, week 2 or week 3, where Tyrod Taylor lit them up. It was a secondary with Cameron Wake, who's now out, the Dolphins' top pass rusher, and they basically pulled him. Later in the game, they took their foot off the gas. I know that Rashard Matthews had 2 touchdowns in that game with 110 plus yards. Are you feeling comfortable with starting Rashard Matthews again? I mean, Jarvis Landry, that game didn't do very much. He was held under, I think, 7 fantasy points. I think it was just a lot of garbage time with Matthews. This week, the Dolphins defense is struggling. They were struggling before the coaching change, and now with Cameron Wake out, that's their top pass rusher. I love Sammy Watkins in this game. Are you with me? I think Sammy Watkins is a borderline wide receiver too.
Yeah, I think he is just on face value, but sometimes it's difficult to plug guys in where you don't really know where they stand in the offense. I mean, the Bills are a favorite, although not a huge favorite. So there's some risk if they could just take the air out of the ball, but Miami's not necessarily covering receivers very well right now. So I think Watkins is a guy who could be sneaky kind of in the second half of the year. This is one of those games where, I'd throw him out there if you don't have a better option. If you have a really deep receiver core, which is probably difficult with some injuries and bye weeks and everything else, then maybe hold back for a week. But I don't think it's a bad play this week.
Well, here's a good question for you. Now, this is one that I would struggle with if I had it. I don't have this question in any of my leagues, but it's one that I thought about when I was going through and doing my rankings. Who would you play? Allen Robinson against the Jets, who's going to be shadowed by Darrelle Revis, who has allowed basically nothing on the entire year, or would you go with somebody like a Sammy Watkins?
I don't know. I think you might still have to go with Robinson, even though he's facing shadow coverage. I mean, they're going to throw the ball a lot, so they could find ways to get him involved, whether it's on short screens, some other things like that. So I think you probably still have to go with Robinson, but you're right. It's not the easiest call. I think you just got to go with the known versus the unknown at this point, and because Sammy Watkins has been out for a few weeks.
All right, there you go. And that's the only concern with Sammy Watkins is that, coming off the ankle injury, but he has basically had off 3 weeks. So I do hope that he's back, and I know he wants more targets. And I think Tyrod Taylor coming back helps this offense. I like LaShawn McCoy in this game too. But moving on to the next one, it's an interesting one because the Packers are coming off of a game where they look like garbage. Aaron Rodgers, that was the worst that I've ever seen him play in an NFL game. He looked really bad. Like I don't want to get into too bit much because it was just an off game for him. Guys like Rodgers don't have back-to-back games like that. And they're going up against a Panthers team that is coming off of a long game on Monday night against a Colts team where they struggled to hold on to that win. Josh Norman supposedly has strep throat. I'm sure he'll be, better come game time on Sunday, but it's still something you worry about. But a lot of people are talking to me about Randall Cobb and the fact that he hasn't performed. He's been the wide receiver 85 over the last 5 weeks. So they were like, well, Josh Norman's going to be on him, so he's still benchable. No. Josh Norman only goes into the slot maybe 2% of the time. Randall Cobb plays there about 98% of the time. I like Cobb as a top 10 option. Are you going to talk people off the ledge and tell them they should have Cobb in their lineups as a wide receiver 1 over some of these other guys like Stephon Diggs that they may be deciding, should I play Cobb or Diggs?
Yeah, I might say that it's kind of a toss-up between the two, but I think I agree that Cobb is still getting targeted a lot. They've had a lot of bad matchups. I mean, if you're looking at the rest of the Green Bay receivers, no one else has really distinguished themselves to come out and to say that they're the top dog there. So Cobb's still getting a lot of targets, unless you think that Aaron Rodgers is just never going to turn things around. They've had some bad matchups. So I think Cobb is a guy that you have to continue to plug into that lineup because you're going to miss one of those 3 touchdown games that can happen at any time.
And how do you feel about Eddie Lacy this week? I mean, I know he scored last week and that's, that boosted his total. He didn't necessarily do a great job. I mean, it was against Denver, but this week he's going against Carolina. It's not like the easiest of run defenses to go against. Like, how are you feeling about Eddie Lacy this week?
I mean, I'm not feeling great about him, but you got to start him. I don't think you're going to have somebody else that you're going to start in front of him. At least the situation with Starks seems like it's somewhat resolved itself. You weren't getting a lot of clarity from Mike McCarthy before, but it seemed like it was more of an injury issue a couple of weeks ago when Lacy, was taking a back seat to Starks. So I think you got to start him just because you're probably not going to have another a couple of running backs who are the lead guys on offenses that are probably going to score 25 plus points.
Well, Kevin, I'm going to hit you with a few of these questions as we go on because I like hearing your responses to them. Eddie Lacy or Jeremy Langford?
I think I'd still go with Lacy just for the touchdown potential.
There you go. All right. So moving on to the next game, the Jaguars at the Jets. I know we touched on Allen Robinson and the fact that he's going to be shadowed by Darrelle Revis. I'm not a huge fan of him this week. I can't get on Allen Robinson's back this week and ride him like we've been. I think that Allen Hurns, I would start over Allen Robinson this week. Hurns is going up against a struggling Antonio Cromartie and Buster Screen because he's going to move around the field. Now, Hurns, he relies on the long ball, and that's fine. Like, it happens. Bortles has been hitting him. But this offense has to move the ball somehow, and I think that he's got the best matchup to do so because TJ Yeldon going against that Jets run defense, they're tough. Let's just face that. They're really tough. I know that Latavius Murray did some work against them last week, but the Jets, is it just me, Kevin, or the Jets seem like they didn't even come to play last week?
Yeah, it was a really weird game. I mean, you had the injury to Fitzpatrick early. The Raiders aren't really the joke that they have been in the past. Obviously, they've been able to kind of move things on both sides of the ball. And I think the Jets team, they're a little bit fragile because of outside of Darrelle Revis, they're not really playing well as far as coverage is concerned. So if they're not getting pressure on the quarterback and you have a quarterback who's playing well, they're still vulnerable to getting picked apart. So I think, coming to play or not is something that's very difficult to figure out. But I think basically everything was kind of sliding in the wrong direction last week, and they're facing an Oakland team that seems to be getting better each week.
I just think it was the Geno Smith effect. It doesn't just affect the offense; it affects the entire team. They're just like, "Oh God, Geno's back."
Did it affect you sitting at home? Did you feel it or not?
I definitely felt it. I felt it for all Chris Ivory owners, Brandon Marshall owners, Eric Decker owners. I think everybody felt it. I mean, maybe Geno Smith will bump up Jeff Cumberland's usage because, I mean, I don't know. Fitzpatrick doesn't throw to him.
Well, I guess Fitzpatrick's back this week, so that's a good sign.
He is, and that's what caused me to kind of bump up a few of the receivers from the Jets because I was worried that he wasn't going to play. I don't know if he's exactly going to be, a lock to be as good as he's been playing, but
it's his left thumb, right? So
right,
I think the issue is just if he gets hit or if he tries to run the ball, which he does a little too often sometimes. That beard, like his helmet never stays on. I don't know. They need to figure out like some sort of chin strap for that beard. Hopefully he just doesn't get knocked out again, because then who knows what's going to happen.
I think the beard just causes too much leeway. All right. So the next game we're going to move on to is the Rams at the Vikings. This is an interesting one. The Vikings have been playing better ever since Stephon Diggs has kind of stepped up and taken over that number one receiver slot in Minnesota. But this is a week where, I'm curious to see. This is like the week that's going to help me decide how I feel about Stephon Diggs going forward, because this is going to be a tough matchup. He's going to see a lot of Janoris Jenkins, and he's been really, really good in coverage. He's one of the top cover corners in the league, and the Rams have done a phenomenal job against passing games like this year as a whole. Now, that being said, you're not benching Stephon Diggs with the way he's been playing, but there's guys like that we've talked about that it's tough not to think like Randall Cobb. I would play Cobb over Stephon Diggs this week. I just think that the Rams are somehow still underrated. And Adrian Peterson, while he hasn't, had that breakout game, I know people were expecting it against the Bears last week. He hasn't really had it. And the Rams, I don't know if they're the team to do it against, but I think he's more likely to break out than Stephon Diggs is in this matchup. But the surprise one is Tavon Austin. Tavon Austin, do we have to take this guy for real, Kevin?
I guess so. I mean, he was a high draft pick, so they're definitely utilizing him a lot.
Yeah, it seems like I don't know what happened or what clicked. It's like he was barely ever used. It's not like the coaching staff, did an overhaul or anything like that. But I do know that Todd Gurley is taking away an awful lot of attention from that passing game and Tavon Austin. I don't know if they're too worried about Austin getting the ball. I think it's more about Gurley at this point, who is, by the way, locked to be a top 3 running back seemingly every single week. The man's on a tear. We don't need to touch too much on that game. There aren't too many teetering starters. The next one is the Redskins going to Foxborough to play the Patriots. Now, the Patriots, it's like light up everybody on their team this week. I don't know who you'd want to sit. I know that I was looking at a consensus heading into it, and a lot of people have Brandon LaFell outside of their top 30 receivers this week. I have him inside my top 24. I think this is the week where it's like if you've been patient with LaFell through his 5-drop game. Last week, he did play, I think it was close to 90% of the snaps. So he didn't get benched. He's back on the field. He did just fine last week. He didn't, nothing over the top. But Julian Edelman has 6 touchdowns. Okay, that's not going to keep up, guys. Julian Edelman doesn't score 15 touchdowns in the year. So I see regression coming. And I think that this could be the breakout week for Brandon LaFell. Like, I ranked him ahead of Allen Robinson. I'm sure I'm going to regret it, but do you think that Brandon LaFell could be that sneaky player that people are just kind of waiting for him to break out, and then, this might happen, and they're like, well, I guess I probably should have played him. I'll do it next week.
Yeah, I think that definitely has a chance of happening. I mean, Edelman's a guy where, first of all, I've already been calling for his regression a couple of times, and he has games like he did last week where he just sneaks into the end zone a couple, once or twice. To really boost up his score. So I definitely think LaFell is going to be involved in the offense. If you look at what he did last year in the second half of the year, he was very strong. So, LaFell's a great play. He's probably a little bit less risky than some of the other guys you're talking about, like Allen Robinson, who could get completely shadowed.
Yeah, and looking at this game, against the Redskins, who can you sit on the Patriots? You're playing Brady, you're playing Gronk, you're playing Edelman, I'm playing LaFell, you're playing Deion Lewis, LeGarrette Blount. The Redskins have been murdered against the run over the last 3 weeks. Over 20 fantasy points to each of the starting running backs that have played them the last 3 weeks. I don't know. I just don't know who you could sit on the Patriots this week. Now, on the other side of the ball, it looks like Deshaun Jackson's going to come back. He's going to play. I don't know if he's going to be on a snap count. I don't know, but there figures to be a whole lot of garbage time in this game. Now, Deshaun Jackson, Pierre Garçon, who do you think has the better game in this one?
I would stick with Garcon. I think it's going to be a volume game, so let's go with him. Deshaun Jackson's can get you some big plays, but you know he could also pull up lame in the first quarter. You don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, well, we've kind of seen that this year. I mean, I didn't expect Deshaun Jackson to be out all the way up until now. But you know what's a crazy stat? Before I even say it, who would you play, LaFell or Pierre Garçon?
LaFell.
I'm with you. So the stat I found, do you know that despite seeing I think it's 48 targets in the 6 games that Deshaun Jackson has been out, Pierre Garçon has not recorded over 65 yards receiving in that time. Rookie Jamison Crowder has done it twice. So it's mind-boggling. Garçon, he's just not a very good receiver at this point. So I have him down in the bottom end wide receiver 3s this week, a little bit ahead of Deshaun just because of that risk of re-injury or maybe not even playing at all. But moving on from that game into the Titans at the Saints. Kevin, I don't know if you heard the news. It was kind of a present to me this week. I mean, I shouldn't say that because I don't want to see people get fired all the time. It's not like I root for people to get fired from their job. But Ken Wisenhunt was just so bad as a coach. He was let go. I mean, I'm sure you heard the news.
Mm-hmm.
And Mike Mularkey has taken over as the interim head coach, and he's already told Antonio Andrews that he is the workhorse going forward, that he's the guy. Do you believe him?
You know, I think I do believe him. I mean, Andrews hasn't been extremely impressive as from a yards per carry perspective, but he's a guy that can do a lot of things. I think he's kind of fits more of the mold of the running back that they want than someone like Bishop Sankey. I don't really see what Cobb is necessarily going to provide that Andrews doesn't, since they kind of look like very similar types of players. So I think he will be, but it's always one of those situations where I think we saw this with Dan Campbell, where he came in, they talked up the run a lot. They did run the ball because they had some really easy matchups and big victories, and then it all fell apart against the Patriots, and they barely ran the ball at all that week. So I don't know if Andrews is necessarily going to be heavily involved in a game here where the Saints, should light them up for 35 points.
Yeah, if you can guarantee me that Andrews was going to see 15 targets against this Saints run defense, I'd play him. And the thing is, I've actually bumped him up to where I think he's a solid flex this week because I think he's got a good shot at the end zone. Because if he is the workhorse, and I believe it for at least 1 week, I like him. We've actually graded him. I was looking through his ratings that we've given him over the weeks at PFF, and his grading has been above average in every single game, including well above average the last 2 games where he's racked up 20. He's had 26 carries and 121 yards.
He's looked decent, so I think that's why the coaches like him. I mean, he's slow, but he's kind of making do with what he has. So coaches kind of like those bigger running backs who fall forward also.
Yeah, and David Cobb, I know a lot of people were stashing him off waivers, and I'm not saying that you can't stash him in deeper leagues, but I never understood the love for Cobb. I think that he's kind of like Sean Green 2.0. I mean, Andrews is a similar back, and he's the guy that's been getting some reps in practice, and he's not it's just I like him. He's been named the starter. You could use him as a flex this week. Not a bad play. At least we have some sort of clarity, whereas Wisenhunt would give all 4 running backs 5 carries.
Who knows? Dexter McCluster could just dominate the backfield this week, so you never know what's going to happen. Let's not believe into coaches too much here.
Oh man, I was hoping Bishop Sankey would have gotten another shot.
Bishop Sankey's dead. You can not only drop him, you can actually just have him removed from your league, I think.
I like it. But the Saints on the other side, obviously, Drew Brees. I said last week in my article that I do for DFS for PFF. It was Yahoo. I said to stack Drew Brees, pay for him last week, and stack him with Brandon Cooks. It really worked out pretty well last week. But now Willie Snead and Brandon Cooks, are they going to cancel each other out? I don't know. I think that Cooks has the higher upside, that he's got the more potential. So I think Cooks is coming back to a every week low end wide receiver 2 that kind of has to be played, especially in matchups against the Titans, who have been struggling against the pass. There's not too many teetering players there again. that we're talking about? I mean, maybe like a Willie Snead or, Pierre Garçon. I guess that's a question that you'd have. In that case, I mean, I'd probably play Snead. Are you with me there?
Yeah, no, I would play Snead. I mean, the whole Snead Cooks discussion, it's really about whether or not the total pie is going to be big enough, and I think in this game it will be to play either.
Right. So I agree on that one. So now that moving on from that game, going on to the next one, we're going to go into the Raiders, the team we've talked about. Now, this is a weird game that, we wouldn't have usually looked forward to as fantasy players. But the Raiders at the Steelers, this game has shootout potential in it. I mean, Roethlisberger looked just as bad as Aaron Rodgers last week against a Bengals defense that's not necessarily as good as Denver, but the Raiders this week, I mean, let's be honest. They're a decent run stopping unit. I don't think against the pass they're anything special. And I think Roethlisberger bounces back well in this game. Obviously, you're starting your Antonio Brown. I have Martavis Bryant as a top end wide receiver too. I think Marcus Wheaton is actually a sneaky play lining up across from DJ Hayden. I don't know what it is about him. I
don't know about that, man.
Kevin can't agree with me.
That's really sneaky.
That's like, yeah, we're talking like if you're starting, like if you're in like a 16 team league or something, or if you're looking like bottom feeder waivers. I'm just saying he's got a great matchup. If he's ever going to do anything, it's this week, I guess.
I'll go with that.
But the Steelers, they obviously had a huge loss in Le'Veon Bell, which, by the way, I'd like to share that I made a trade this morning in one of my home leagues that, man, I had a brutal start to the season. Des Bryant went down. Lamar Miller sucked. Sam Bradford was awful. Like, I started out in that league 0-5, and then I've just won one game the last 2 weeks, and I was like, you know what? I'm waving the red flag. I'm selling off some pieces, and I traded Amari Cooper and LeGarrette Blount for Le'Veon Bell. It's a keeper league, so I lost Cooper, but I felt like I made up for it in Bell. So if you're in a keeper league, the only reason I shared that story is because if you're in a keeper league and you feel like, yeah, I'm probably out of it right now, what I would do is I would go and trade some of your pieces for draft picks. If you guys are able to do that, trade them for some other pieces that you may be able to keep for next year, like Le'Veon Bell. But D'Angelo Williams has taken his place, Kevin, and I know there's some people clamoring for him to be a top 10 running back, including our own Mike Clay is saying that he's a top 10 running back going forward. Now, I don't know if I can say that he's a top 10 for me. If you say top 15, yeah, I'm there. I just don't think he's a lock for top 10. He's older. The more carries he gets, he'll wear down a little bit, but I do like him. I mean, I don't know so much this week. How do you feel about D'Angelo Williams going forward?
No, I like him a lot. I think that he's in a high-powered offense. You saw what he did week 1 and 2. There's really nobody behind him at all, so he should just soak up carries and targets. I'm actually kicking myself right now because I started the year with D'Angelo Williams on a lot of my teams because I draft so wide receiver heavy, and I figured I could plug him in the first couple of weeks. And unfortunately, I still only have him left on a couple of teams because I dropped him a lot for these guys who you're just hoping for, who are on crappy offenses, who never ended up coming around. So I'm kicking myself right now, but I think D'Angelo Williams, I think top 10 is fair. He's definitely on a strong offense. So when you're on a strong offense, you can catch the ball and you can run the ball. There's no one else really behind you. Why not? Almost any decently talented running back could put up, between RB10 and RB15 numbers in that system.
Yeah, no, and that's where I'm kind of at with it. I think that he obviously came off like motivated in the first couple of weeks, and he looked good even in relief of Le'Veon Bell last week. He went for so much money on waivers. I bid everything I had. I only got him in one league. That was it. I was outbid by him like by $200 of like a $10,000 budget. Like, it was so frustrating. I bid everything I had for him. But the good news, guys, if you missed out on D'Angelo Williams in your waivers in your league, we have daily fantasy. Football's obviously back, guys. It feels like the playoffs already, thanks to 1 Week Fantasy at DraftKings.com. With millions being won each week, every play in every game could take you closer to a life-changing payday. This isn't just fantasy as usual, guys. You will be playing with the big boys. This is DraftKings. Welcome to the big time. Hurry to DraftKings.com now and use promo code PFF to play for free with your first deposit in this Sunday's $1 million fantasy football contest. First place takes home $100,000. Enter PFF for free entry now at DraftKings.com. That is DraftKings.com. Kevin, I lost. It was my first bad week in DFS last week. It was awful. Justin Forsett didn't do anything. I had a whole lot of Le'Veon Bell. How did you play last week? How'd you do?
No, actually, I wasn't able to play last week. Wasn't able to put together rosters, but that's kind of part of the game in DFS. I think it's interesting when you compare football to some other sports. Predicting exactly what a player is going to do is pretty tough, on a week-to-week basis. But you got to keep plugging away, and that's why it's kind of over a whole season. You got to think about it.
Definitely is, and I've like I said, I've done well this year, and it was my first losing week. But so I can't really complain. I'll get back at it this week, and one of the players that I may use in my lineups, despite hurting me really bad last week, because I think I had him in 75% of my lineups, was Mike Evans.
And you hate Evans too.
I really do. And he lost me money last week. But
maybe he knew that and he purposefully decided not to do anything.
Yes, Mike Evans, if you're listening, make it up for me this week, and maybe I'll like you again. Oh, not again. I don't know. I'm looking for reasons to like Mike Evans. I can't find him. But either way, he's still a target monster. Vincent Jackson looks to be out another week. Austin Seferian-Jenkins may be coming back. It seems like he will. But going against the Giants team that has allowed some astronomical numbers to wide receivers, I mean, just look no further than last week when the Saints scored 7 touchdowns, passing touchdowns against them. How are you feeling about Evans this week? Do you think he bounces back from his sluggish performance in week 8 and weeks 2 through whatever?
No. I think he should. I guess the problem seems to be that, number one, Winston, you expect he has kind of locked in on Evans at sometimes, but it's really in those games where they're trailing. So if they can keep the score close, I think they're 2.5-point underdogs. They are at home against the Giants. Who knows what Eli is going to do? If they get a lead, I think he's dangerous. So he's kind of the high ceiling, high floor type. I mean, yeah, high ceiling, low floor type.
Yeah, that's like me with the buy low, sell high, and all that stuff when I get confused when I say it. But I agree. But here's the thing. Mike Evans is a guy that you put inside of a tournament because he should have a huge game. I mean, he's not someone that I would play in cash. He's proven to just not be very reliable. That's basically what it comes down to. He's going to see targets against them. That's all I can say about that. Eli Manning on the other side of the ball. I mean, Eli going to Eli sometimes, I guess is what you can say. I know he had 6 touchdowns last week, but how comfortable can you really be putting Eli Manning into your lineup every week?
Yeah, I mean, it is the Buccaneers. I mean, they've given up some tremendous games to Mariota, to Cousins. I mean, I know that they kind of shut down Breeze earlier this year, but Breeze had that shoulder injury. So it's one of those games where, yeah, he could flame out, but he could also throw 4 touchdowns. So I think this is the type of matchup where you probably got to slide him into your lineup unless you have a top quarterback.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have him inside my top 10 against Tampa. They've allowed some big games. We know that. And by the way, I just wanted to say I was trying to do some research this week because I want to like Mike Evans more. I want to know why everybody likes him and why I don't.
You're obsessed with Mike Evans.
I am. It's weird. It's like that guy that I've latched onto because it's like that guy that you see everybody liking and you're trying to figure out why. And I'm trying to justify it to myself over and over. Like, why do I hate this guy so much? Oh, that's why. But I found some stats like, Torrey Smith has seen less than half the targets of Mike Evans. I think he's seen 24, while Mike Evans has seen 52. And Torrey Smith has more fantasy points. He has Colin Kaepernick throwing to him.
That is, yeah, I didn't realize he had more fantasy points. That's pretty discouraging for Mike Evans.
Yeah, it's not very good. But moving on to the next game, Julio Jones going to destroy San Francisco secondary. It's pretty ridiculous what they've allowed to some receivers, but we know that. We know that we're playing him. We know that we're playing Devonta Freeman. But what in the heck do we do with Matt Ryan?
I think you got to play him in this matchup.
I felt like the same thing in the last 2 weeks, and Matt Ryan's let me down. Like, Matt Ryan is my guy. Like, I don't know if you guys have caught on by now, but outside of my, precious Bears, the Falcons are probably my second favorite NFL team. So I have a little bit of a rooting interest for them. And Matt Ryan has really, really let me down the last couple of weeks. I mean, I know his overall numbers looked decent, but it was just sloppy. I just don't know. Their offense is struggling a little bit. Devonta Freeman hasn't scored in the last 2 weeks. I think that ends this week. I think Devonta Freeman is worth the price of admission into DFS this week. You could even put him and Julio Jones inside of a cash lineup and fill it with a bunch of other, like Jeremy Langford's and those cheaper options. and love your lineup in cash. Love it. On the other side, Blaine Gabbert's starting. So can we pretty much just cross off every single 49ers player?
Yeah, I think you pretty much can. I mean, I know a lot of people are justifiably down on Gabbert. I mean, who knows? You know, I mean, obviously he wasn't playing with the most stacked teams back in Jacksonville. Maybe by some miracle he can throw the ball up and Torrey Smith can catch it or something. I don't know. I mean, they seem to have pretty much given up. So I would treat it the same way for your fantasy teams.
Yeah. I mean, Blaine Gabbert, I feel bad for the guy, man. Like, I know that he's an NFL player, and why would I feel bad for him? But he's been so bad. Like, he had such high
He's still
expectations.
around though. He's still around, so he's lucky. Lucky he was a first round pick, or else he would have been, bagging groceries a long time ago.
Yeah, he would have been Rex Grossman. But Colin Kaepernick, the reason he was benched wasn't because Blaine Gabbert's better than him, guys. Like, understand that. I think that it was needed. I know there's a lot of people saying, you think Gabbert's better? Why would you bench Kaepernick? It wasn't for that. I think that they benched Kaepernick to get his head straight. I think that he needs just to take 2 weeks off and just forget about it and remember who the hell he was that brought him into this league, that made him the player he was, that, defenses actually feared. Now he's a joke. That's basically the best way to put it. And I think that the 2 weeks off will help him get back to at least being a competent NFL starting quarterback. And maybe, just maybe, that'll give Carlos Hyde time to get back to the field, because I don't think Carlos Hyde plays until possibly after their bye week. Like, do you think that Carlos Hyde's going to play at all?
No, I really don't understand why they wouldn't just shut him down for the whole season, quite honestly. If he really has a stress fracture, what's the point of bringing him back? That would seem to be very strange move to bring him back at all, quite honestly. But I guess that's still being hung out there. I mean, they haven't put him on IR, so that's obviously a possibility.
Yeah, being a big part of their future, it just doesn't make any sense to me why they would do this over and over. Oh, you're not going to practice all week, but then we're going to trot you out there on Sundays and expect you to do well. Like, I don't know. I don't like it. But we don't need to touch too much there. Moving on to the Broncos at the Colts. I know a lot of people have been waiting for this game. This is a good one. Peyton Manning, I know he didn't throw a touchdown last week, Kevin, but he looked a lot better. Like, can we agree on that?
Yeah, no, he definitely looked a lot better. You're right. He didn't score a touchdown, and I think this applies very heavily to Demaryius Thomas. I think that they've been getting a little bit unlucky. You saw Thomas go down a couple times, once on the 1-inch line or whatever it was, and then once within the 10. So I think some touchdowns are coming for them. I think most encouragingly, they were able to run the ball a lot better. So I don't know what was going on, but I think you did see that C.J. Anderson looked like he had a little bit more burst when he was moving around. And I know that Hillman's kind of the starter, and he looks good too. But I still think C.J. Anderson is probably more of your foundation type back, just because he's coming in at 220, whereas Hillman is a little bit smaller, more of a scat back type, although he's been effective.
But the weird part is that Ronnie Hillman's been getting the goal line carries. Did you notice that? Like, I mean, it wasn't just
they switch it up. They switch it up. But yeah, I definitely did notice that. Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't seem like it was by happenstance or anything like that. Like, I remember there was a drive that C.J. Anderson was in for quite a bit of it, and then they swapped him out, and Hillman got the goal line carry. I was hoping for a touchdown because I had Hillman going in one of my dynasty leagues. He didn't get in that time. But who would you play if you had the two on your roster? If you let's say you handcuffed C.J. Anderson with Ronnie Hillman, who would you play?
I guess until we discover otherwise, but it would not surprise me I think they're pretty equal. But I don't see any reason that you would elevate Anderson above Hillman.
Well, that's the thing is I have them both neck and neck in my rankings this week. I have them both, I think, at 19 and 20 in my running back rankings this week. So both bottom end RB2s. I thought it was interesting that the Broncos hadn't had not even one single top 10 PPR finish for a running back in the first 7 weeks. And then last week they had two of them that finished obviously inside the top 10. But the Colts on the other side, they went and fired Pep Hamilton. Do you think that was justified?
Not really, not at all. I mean, I think Pep Hamilton's a weird guy. Like, I remember there was all these complaints about the fact that they were running the ball too much 2 years ago, but the stats didn't really say that, quite honestly. And then they threw the ball a ton last year, and then this year, the whole thing is just a mess. I don't know if you can really point to Pep Hamilton as being the problem here. I think you kind of got a lot of different problems. And especially when you got the GM, I mean, when you're drafting, Dorsett in the first round, where you got holes all over your interior line and everything else, it just seems very strange to me.
Yeah, the GM seems like the bigger problem here. I know people have been on Pagano to get fired. Honestly, it's been execution. Let's be honest. Andrew Luck has looked like crap. He hasn't looked very good. I've been waiting for him to turn it around, and it hasn't really happened yet. And I know they're blaming every single injury in the world. First it was his shoulder, then it was ribs, and now he has, what was it, an ankle injury he's dealing with, they're saying?
I hadn't heard that one, but it wouldn't surprise me.
No, seriously, I read it this morning. They're saying that he should be better, but he was dealing with an ankle injury against the Panthers. It's like, okay, stop. Like, he's Frankenstein now out there. But he's ruining the value of a lot of players, including Frank Gore. I do think that, firing Pep Hamilton, it may be a sign that, you know what, we're running the ball. Like, I think the reason that the Colts are in a bad spot is because they've been throwing the ball so much at the start of a game. Luck may get picked off, fumble, whatever the case may be, put the defense in a bad spot. They get scored on, and then they have to throw the rest of the game.
Yeah.
Where I think, like how most NFL teams, they script their first 15 plays or whatever it is. I think that they're going to script, no matter what happens, they're going to script it for maybe 10, 11, 12 runs of those plays just to get the running game going, hold the ball for a little while, keep their defense off the field. It may not be a bad idea to do against the Broncos this week. That's all I'm saying. Peyton Manning returning there. I like Peyton Manning as a low-end QB1. I know people just don't trust him anymore, but it's a great matchup. He's due for some regression. Like you said, they've been unlucky. Demaryius Thomas is due for a 2-touchdown game really soon, and it could happen here. Have you heard anything about Vontae Davis? I know he went down. I actually fell asleep towards the end of that game. It was a crap fest. I just was tired of watching it. But Vontae Davis, I saw he went down. He grabbed his ankle. Did anything come of that?
I haven't heard anything. The thing is, what's interesting about Vontae Davis, they started off week 1 against the Bills, and Sammy Watkins had 0 targets or whatever, maybe 1 target or something like that. And then after that, he hasn't really been that great. I mean, he's been okay, but he hasn't really been that great. So I'm not sure if it's that much of a concern. I think you're going to see Demaryius Thomas. He's the focal point of the offense right now. So he and hopefully Sanders will kind of get a bigger share also this week.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing is that Vontae Davis was shadowing players too, and now he over the last 3 weeks, I think it's been 3 or 4 weeks, he hasn't shadowed. So I think he's going to see a mix if he does play. I think he's going to see a mix of Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas, and I think Demaryius Thomas is more than capable of beating Vontae Davis a couple times. And when he's not on him, the Colts secondary is one of the worst in the NFL. So fire up those Broncos receivers, fire up Peyton Manning if you stream quarterbacks, because I know he was available on a lot of waiver wires. And then T.Y. Hilton, he may not play. I don't know. He's missing practice. He's
Foot sprain is never good.
No, it's not. And it's becoming a real thing. And so pay attention to that. He wasn't a great matchup to begin with. Dante Moncrief was a disappointment last week. He didn't play against Josh Norman on a majority of his routes run, and he only caught 2 balls for 18 yards. Obvious disappointment. And this matchup is no better.
Yeah, what I thought was a somewhat interesting trend last week was the fact that Bradshaw got a little bit more involved. It seemed like they were using him as their short yardage back. And, I really think Ahmad Bradshaw is an awesome football player when he gets a chance to get out there. I mean, he's just amazing at picking up blitzes, and he picks up first downs when he just shouldn't, 3 or 4 times during the course of a game. So that's a big deal for an offense. And I know Frank Gore has been effective, but Bradshaw really has the ability to pick up some of those first downs when you really need it. So I wouldn't be surprised if he gets involved a little bit more going forward. I didn't think it was going to happen, but I mean, he's such a great talent. Why not?
Well, if they decide to run the ball a heck of a lot more, he could definitely get more involved. I'm surprised that he wasn't more involved in the pass game. I think he had 1 target last week.
Yeah, they weren't throwing it to the running backs much. They were going downfield, which kind of makes sense. I mean, it's what you got to do to come back. So I'll give Andrew Luck credit there. They did come back.
Yeah, he hasn't been targeting the running backs too much this season to begin with. I think he's just always looking for that big play. He's unwilling to throw it away, very unwilling to dump it off. His decision-making has just been pretty bad. But the next game is the Sunday night game, the Eagles at the Cowboys. This is a rematch. They played each other earlier in the year where that was with Tony Romo. It was without Des Bryant, though. The Eagles stopped the run very well. They've been playing defense extremely well, which is the only reason they're winning some games, because the offense has been anemic. Jordan Matthews, they're saying that he had 182 yards and a touchdown the first 2 weeks, including against one of those games was against the Cowboys where he had 82 yards and a touchdown. I don't know. Like he's looked really bad, and now they're saying that he had. I know injuries are becoming the scapegoat, but him for his drops that he's been having, some easy drops. They're saying something about a ligament in his hand. Have you heard about that?
Yeah, no, that was conveniently put out there last
Mm-hmm.
week after those drops. I mean, the problem with Matthews, the way I see it is, I had Matthews. Of course, I was kind of very focused on him before the bye when they were playing. Um, like if you watch, he's just running these shallow crossing routes on like 90% of pass plays. It's just so predictable. It's so boring. It's so low ceiling, the type of routes that he's running, that it's just really, it's just gross from a fantasy perspective. You just got to hope you have him in a PPR league.
Yeah, I think that they need to change things up. Chip Kelly's offense has caught up. The NFL knows it. They know what he's doing. They know what he's trying to do. And Sam Bradford has not executed much of anything. I know Riley Cooper gave up on one of his pass routes the other game, and it caused an interception. But this week, I actually like DeMarco Murray to bounce back. I know the last time they played against the Cowboys, he had 2 yards on 11 carries, I think it was. That was back when DeMarco Murray had, negative yardage on, 90% of his runs. He's looked better. I know Ryan Matthews has looked even better, but they're sticking with Murray. They paid way too much money for him. Chip Kelly's a very stubborn guy, and they're going to stick with him. I do like him against the Cowboys this week as a high-end RB2. I'd play him there. Do you agree, or are you saying, no, I think they're going to start fading him out and using Matthews more?
I don't know. There was quite a bit of talk and buzz about the fact that they need to use Matthews more. I mean, my personal opinion, number one, coming into the season, I thought people were overhyping Murray over Matthews because I didn't really see them as being that different in talent. Obviously, they paid Murray a lot more money, but that was just kind of reflection of what what have you done for me lately, basically, and what they did last year. And now there's all this talk about Matthews being better than Murray, and of course the stats show he's better, but it's a pretty unreliable stat, yards per carry. You bust one big run and all of a sudden you look a lot better. So I don't necessarily think Matthews is better than Murray, or Murray doesn't fit into their system and all this other nonsense that we're hearing out there. But I just wouldn't be surprised, because coaches have ultimate decision on who gets the ball, that Matthews might start getting the ball a little bit more often. So that's the concern with Murray.
Well, that's the thing is maybe, I've heard so many different excuses and things like that for DeMarco Murray, in the fact that maybe he's not as fresh as Ryan Matthews and the play calling is not as good when he's in the game. I don't really buy that, just because of the fact that over this large of a sample size, it is what it is. I loved Ryan Matthews' talent. I always have. The guy's just been a piece of glass, essentially. But I've always liked him. It's nice to see him actually recognized for his talent, finally, outside of San Diego. But I still think that it's Murray's backfield. I think he scores this week against the Cowboys. But now on the other side, real quick, Des Bryant, we talked about him last week. I told people that I wouldn't have played him. I actually started Reggie Bush over him.
I don't know if I would have done that, but
I know. Well, I did, and it probably would have worked out had Reggie Bush, not died because of concrete on the field.
yeah, isn't that so ridiculous? I don't know how they cannot get these things fixed up. I mean, I realize it's St. Louis, and the team's probably going to be gone sometime soon anyway. But come on, man.
Another team that's going to be gone pretty soon, the Chargers. They're going to be leaving San Diego and going to Los Angeles, right?
They've applied for it.
Yeah, I was told that it's actually going to be a thing. So that's the Monday night game. Phillip Rivers is going to be without his number one pass catcher, Keenan Allen. Pour one out for Keenan Allen. Man, that guy was having he was having some season. I went through the numbers. I hadn't even realized how good of a season he was having. I think he was on pace for, I think I added up, it was 134 receptions, almost 1,500 yards, 8 touchdowns. Like, the man was going off. The question is, I know my answer, but I want to give it to you. What's your answer on who's going to be the more productive receiver going forward? Will it be Malcolm Floyd or will it be Stevie Johnson?
I don't know. I think it's pretty much a toss-up, honestly. The thing about Stevie Johnson is he kind of seemed like an Allen clone going into the season, but he really hasn't been. He hasn't even gathered, let's say, 20% of targets or something. I thought that he would be close and they would be very close, but Allen's just been so far above Stevie Johnson this year, and I don't know if there's really an excuse for Stevie Johnson. And it just seems like Phillip Rivers at least has that option of Floyd to stretch the field. So I think Johnson, from a PPR perspective, is going to be a little bit more reliable. He's probably a closer fit to Allen, so he's going to soak up some more targets. And Floyd is more of your high upside type of play. So I think it might be close overall as far as scoring is concerned, with Johnson a lot more steady in his production.
Agree with that take 100%. I think that we know at this point of Malcolm Floyd's career, we know what he is. It's his last year in the NFL. He's already said it. And Chargers are done. There's no reason for him to keep playing. But there's a whole lot of production to go around because I added it up. Keenan Allen has accounted for 27.6% of receptions, almost 25% of targets, 26% of yards, and 22% of Rivers touchdowns. Now, Antonio Gates is apparently doing better. We know he was limited a little bit in the last game, but he should be obviously a lock to be in your lineup at this point. He's a top 3 tight end, especially with Keenan Allen out. But I love Stevie Johnson going forward. I think he's the guy that sees more targets. I know he's been lackluster so far, but I think it has to do with the fact he hasn't seen very many targets.
Yeah. I don't know. I just think it's one of these situations where with Allen out, it might give a slight boost to everyone, but then still not give enough of a boost to any one particular guy other than Gates, to make them somebody you really feel great about starting on a week in, week out basis.
Yeah, well, that's another one is Dontrell Inman. He's actually somebody that you can pay attention to in those leagues. Like if you're in a 12-team league and you have a bench slot that was occupied by, a Reggie Bush or something like that, you could throw Inman there and just see what happens, because Inman, he's an interesting one to stick there. He's going to be actually taking the actual spot that Keenan Allen was playing on the field. So I want to see how this plays out on Monday night. And the Bears defense, they're there for the taking, guys. Like you could start any receiver against them and you'll probably be okay. Stevie Johnson actually has the best matchup in the slot against them. Sherrick McManus was benched last week. I don't know if he's going to play, if they're going to actually go back to him, but call me crazy, but I think Stevie Johnson gets targeted more than his season high of 8 times. He's only been targeted more than 6 times, 2 times this season. So his targets are going to go way through the roof. The Bears are allowing tons and tons of fantasy points. They allow 1.41 fantasy points per target to opposing receivers. I don't know if you knew that stat.
No, I did not know that exact stat. But I want to get one plug in for my man Alshon Jeffrey. By the way, I just love him. I've loved him all year. I was heartbroken when he went down, and this is somewhat of a difficult matchup though, because Jason Verrett's been playing well. He'll probably end up shadowing him a bit. But if you watch that game last week. I mean, it was legitimately just an automatic first down to throw it to Alshon Jeffrey. If he just runs 5 yards down the field and turns around, he's just too big to get around, and he's stretching the field. I mean, he's kind of doing everything. So I just want to get a plug in there for my man Alshon Jeffrey, and I really think he's definitely, in my opinion, a top 5-6 option the rest of the season.
That's actually not a bad idea. I know he's got this matchup, and I know he has Denver coming up, and then he's got one other tough matchup that I know he's got. And then after that, it lightens up a little bit. But Alshon Jeffrey, man, that's your guy. I know he is. I
mean, from a talent perspective, he's right up there at the top, and then he's getting 35% of targets. So you combine those two things together, it's pretty nice.
And the thing you can go off this Monday night is that Jason Verrett, he's only 5'10", and Jeffrey himself is 6'3", so he's got the advantage there. I mean, that's not
you're just going to post him up.
Yeah, no, that's what they should do. And Cutler has no issue throwing it up to him. We know that. I think Martellus Bennett is a solid option this week. I know he's been struggling. I know he's been playing like garbage, but I think he's a top 8 tight end this week. Maybe top 6 for me.
I think Bennett's. I mean, no one else in that offense has really come around, and it'll be interesting to see with Forte down what happens to those running back targets. Because I mean, I guess Langford can probably play in that and get some of those targets, but he's not going to get as many as Forte was getting. So if you're talking about shorter passes, the tight end is going to fill that void a little bit more than guys like Alshon Jeffrey down the field.
Yep, and Jeremy Langford is going to be an excellent start this week. San Diego is ranked as our worst run defense in the NFL. I know they held Justin Forsett in check somewhat last week, but they've been pretty awful. They really have. Their competition hasn't been there. They're not going to focus on the run game of Chicago the way they would if Matt Forte was there. Langford saw every snap when Forte went down last week. So he's an every down running back. That's rare to find in the NFL. You know he's going to be guaranteed at least 15 touches. And I think he's a rock solid, high floor RB2 that you should use in almost all of your DFS cash lineups. Agree?
Yeah, well, DFS definitely at the price point. My only concern with Langford is we're going to have to see how he plays in the passing game. I don't think this is a bad matchup, but they're on the road. They're underdogs as they usually will be. So if by some chance San Diego is able to get up big early, I'm not sure what will happen, but I agree that the matchup still sets up well. And I like it when these backups are able to take over sometimes because they can sometimes even get a bigger share than the starters. Now, this isn't necessarily one of those cases because Forte, they were really riding Forte, but they don't have anyone else that they feel comfortable with.
Yep. And that's why like I said, I just think he's a high floor guy that I would debate starting over guys like Eddie Lacy against Carolina. I think it's close. I really do. And I have him neck and neck in my rankings, but I would play Langford over someone like Bronny Hillman, for example, this week, just because we don't know if CJ.
I definitely agree with that. Yeah.
But that wraps up all the games for this week, guys. If you have any questions, like I said, don't forget, follow us on Twitter. I am at Mike Tagliere NFL, and then Kevin is at Cole_Kev. Kevin, do you have any final takes that you want to let them know before we get into week 9?
I hope your team's still alive. That's basically it.
Yeah, if you got through last week without anybody dying on your team, then you've won. We'll just say that. But don't forget, guys, you can subscribe to PFF Radio on iTunes, listen on Stitcher and Blog Talk Radio, as well as watch the show if you care to see our faces on YouTube, as well as the Fantasy Sports Network. That's going to wrap it up, guys. So we will see you next week as we cover the Week 10 slate. Good luck in your matchups this week. Until then, guys, lights out.